do the magic, every time you have that type of transaction. And recurring journals, we all have them, we all do them, but do we use the tool inside Epicor for recurring journals? And then I'm going to throw in some extras that maybe you haven't thought about or seen or been able to use effectively. We all are using credit cards a lot more, whether it's for a sales team, maybe for purchasing because of the different point systems and cashback points that you get. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about an end user procedure guide that I'll have available to those who would like to see that. Okay, so this checklist or EUP, I'm really going to recommend that you put together a checklist. And the end user procedure that I have available is a good starting place for that. But I'm also going to show you how the task agent or system agent could as well have that for you. So absolutely, this EUP is going to be available. Let me know in chat or email me. So a couple, again, housekeeping things. Email is a good way to let me know, or email Kevin that you would like the different things you see here. That's going to include the PowerPoint deck and the EUPs that I'm going to present. And also there will be some different pages, slides where you're going to see this share in chat. And I think it only helps us all to kind of share from each other's experiences. So you're going to see this icon in a few places, and we're going to talk about that throughout. Okay, so I mentioned that I wanted to talk kind of about what's going on throughout the month with our job completion and closing. So first off, what is that? Why do we need to complete jobs and close jobs? Because it actually doesn't give you a debit or credit when you physically go in and mark a job as complete or closed. But it is a very important control that we have. And so let's talk about what that does and how we can automate what is a very cumbersome task for your production managers. And so how that affects us as finance people is perhaps they're delaying the timing of doing this function, of completing their jobs, and then that delays us in closing our jobs. We don't want to spend a lot of time completing and closing jobs that are just fine, that where everything, all the boxes are checked, so to speak. So let's talk about what's the difference between a complete job and a closed job. And I would say what the function of completing and closing is to prevent further transactions. So on a complete job, that just simply means I've produced it. I've completed all the operations. So what it will do is it will restrict labor from being recorded against it. So when a job is looked at and the last operation is complete, then that job can be completed and no more labor set against it. So you don't want to do that too early, and you don't want to wait too late and perhaps errors come about because somebody is putting more labor into a job. So that is the difference between a complete job. It also will offset any remaining load. So if we have some production managers in the mix, or you're asked about that, then the shop load informers and things that will help us control that floor and our resources, it cleans that up, so to speak. A closed job means it's totally finished and you've put all your cost against it. So any material burden that may come in later, any PO receipts that were direct for the job, sometimes those things, there's a lag, right, between the time you finish it and the time you close it. So those are the definitions. But let's talk about the actual steps of completion and closing. So when we, the best thing I can think of to, or I didn't think of this, Epicor thought of this, is to use your auto job completion and closing parameters. If you have even just 100 jobs a month, that's 100 transactions that may have multiple materials, multiple operations to work through. And most likely you have far more than 100 jobs to work through. So what we're able to do is look at the auto job completion and closing. So if those of you who are using this tool want to just put in chat maybe some of the parameters you use, I think that would be great to share with the group. And I'm going to talk through the parameters. So the first thing that you're going to see is you have a choice to set up a parameter that is the very same for both complete and close. And so that really is just going to depend on how worried are you about the differences between costing for completion and closing. And I would put that on materials, perhaps, because materials can still be issued after a job is completed. Maybe if that is something that happens often, you would want different parameters. But I've set mine up to have the same parameters for completion and closing. So let's talk about what does this mean. So the thresholds is what they're referred to as, you see here, are going to be both for quantity and cost. You don't have to have both quantity and cost. You can have just one or the other. So we'll talk about all of them. So on quantity, you have a threshold. So let's just take an example of a job where I'm issuing 5 materials and I'm going to be doing 10 each of those materials. If I issue only 7 of one of those materials, then that's not going to meet my threshold. I need to be at 95%. So let's take this up where Sarah can do the math easily. Let's say I needed 100 issued quantity. That was my required issued, and I only issued 90. Again, it's going to follow under, or I over issued. So it's very much going to depend on your environment. Overages may be common if you have issues involving scrap and yield and things, or you may need it to be very exacting. High priced items, very exacting, right? So this is quantity. Cost is going to work the same way. Your over and under is going to be a percentage. So if I have $1,000 cost, then anything below 9,500 is going to throw out an exception. And I'm going to need to look at that. So hopefully you'll have some experience at what these thresholds should be. So I have here this question about, well, should I make my parameters different? Sorry, this one, based on product group. So I just kind of mentioned, well, maybe my costs are very expensive items, and so my quantity becomes more important, right? If I'm just a little off on my quantity, well, of course, my cost is going to be impacted. But the point is, there may be product groups where you have like a supply product group that's it's not that you care less about accuracy, but there might be reasons for the threshold to be lower. So we can indeed assign this code that I've called standard to my product group, or I can say, nope, it's a default. And if my product group does not have a code, then use this. So I don't have them on screenshots, but I could set up one that's called picky. Okay, I'm going to be really picky. These are my picky product groups, and I want them to be 98%. And then another code called, kind of loosey, and those are at 80%. So that's how you would be able to take this parameter and really make it work for you. So this is a big one. This is a big thing that I think we can do throughout the month to take care of auto closing and completing our jobs. Sometimes it's hard to know what these things mean here. I always say go to help, go to field help. I do that all the time myself. I'm never afraid in front of a customer to say, okay, I'm going to look at the help because I can't recall this right off the top of my head. But let's talk about what these mean. So if you want, even if a job is pending an inspection, you want to ignore that fact. You don't want it to get hung up. In other words, then you would check this. And then what is this ignore manually completed operations and or materials? So that is if your operator manually indicates to you that they have completed, the required quantity was 8, but they've put in, hey, I only did 7. But in addition to that, they mark the complete box to say, we're considering this complete. And whatever rules on the floor you follow, that's okay. Well, then you would want to flag this so that those don't get thrown out as an exception, because somewhere along the line you've said that that's acceptable. Okay, so that's kind of auto job completion and closing. So once we run that, and we're going to talk a little bit about frequency and running it, but we would run this probably every week at a minimum. I'm not really much for running things only at the end of the month. It gives you so much more to have to work through. So being able to get on a routine of a weekly at minimum frequency for several of these steps involving job costing and involving inventory reconciliation is my recommendation for best practice. So I've set this up to run every week, and I want to look then at, well, what did it do? Where are my exceptions? So we have this great tool called the Auto Job Completion Exception Tracker, or the Auto Job Closing Exception Tracker. You should be able to find that in your menus. So I have given us a look to see at our completed exception tracker. And this being demo database data, it's not always the greatest, but you can see just it's great information for somebody wanting to take care of. They can know immediately what do they need to do to take care of these exceptions. So I've got this job 2474. Well, it's listed 3 times. Well, why is that? Well, that's because there's 3 exceptions for the job. I'm going to have to take care of 3 items. And you can see here, again, demo data. I have 0 estimated costs, which isn't helpful. But I did have some required quantities right here, 30, 30, and 30. And I didn't issue any of them. But yet I completed operations. So you're going to want to go take care of that. And you're going to want to take care of that before you complete the job and capture and run different reports. So that's very important. So again, with frequency, the more often you're wanting to look at reports as well and capture, time everything together. If you're going to capture every day, well, then you're going to run everything every day. And we're going to set that up on likely a schedule. Okay. So I am a little curious if we're just shy to say we're using it, or maybe nobody is using that tool, but it is a really great tool to use. So check that out. The EUP, I think I have a separate EUP for specific to auto job complete and close. So if you'd like to see that, you can either put that in the chat, or you can email me and see that. So I see a note that you're not seeing those trackers and E10. So let me just get the exact menu choice. And I had to open up my modern shell, and I'm not, it's all the same. I can get there quickly. So you're going to go to production management, job management, if you're kind of following along in your own system, and general operations. And the words, instead of auto in front of it, is just job closing exception tracker, job completion exception tracker. So check those out. You should be able to see those all in E10. So again, the auto isn't in there if you're searching with words. It's just job closing and job completion exceptions. Okay. So let's talk next about the very important process that we call capture. So as you probably know, unless you're very new to Epicor, as transactions that happen out on your floor, you're recording labor against an operation, you are issuing material, so on and so forth. A debit and credit is being sent to basically a temporary file. So it's not posting at that time. It's not posting in real time. It will post when you capture those costs and that WIP. So that is something very important to talk about as far as your frequency and your timing. And I think I might have skipped a slide with my, sorry, my back and forth is not working very well. Try this again. Not sure if it's just slow or. Here's what we're going to do. Sometimes it's just easier to show it to you in this format. Okay, so we were at capture. And so an important report, of course, is going to be your inventory WIP reconciliation report. And so a few things to note about that. You're going to want to run it. I say frequency and timing are key. And here I'd be really interested to hear, how often are you capturing? I think that's really interesting to get to know what people do and how they're making that work for them. But I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important on timing to think about your end dates and such. So what I mean by that is you don't want to capture for, like, if I come in at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and I capture for everything from the night before, then I'm likely going to run into issues. And why would that be? That's going to be because my labor edits have not been approved yet. I haven't looked at my job exceptions. So maybe there's material that hasn't been issued to a job that should have been. So usually you want a lag of a day or two before you capture. So if you're capturing more than once a month, and that's kind of what I'm really trying to promote in this webinar, is to capture more often than once a month. So let's say you capture every week, but let's capture on Tuesday for the week before, right? So that gives your time for labor edits, your time for exceptions, and things like that. But why would we want to do it more often? Well, I like to do it more often so that my inventory WIP reconciliation report isn't 600, 800, however many pages long. It gives me a fewer transactions to have to work through and to prove out and to find those problems easier and backtrack. So I see Don here is reporting that he does it daily with 2 days trailing. So that's great. So if activity for Monday is reviewed and corrected as necessary, and I got to scroll down, Monday's activity is captured on Wednesday. Perfect. Yeah, I have a few other clients doing that same thing. I think that's great. So, and month end, a lot of people capture at month end. And a lot of that does have to do with how many transactions you have and your comfort level of that you don't have many exceptions. You're not seeing things go to a suspense account or something like that. So, but it may seem like, oh, that's a lot more work to do it weekly or to do it like Don does it daily. But I think he would attest, and I would have to agree that the more often you do it, the less headache you're going to have. So that's kind of your capturing of costs and such. So let's just stop for a minute and look at these questions that relate to job costing, because then I'm going to kind of move on to some other things. So will the auto job close process account for other discrepancies like missing job receipts to inventory? So So if that is a job to stock and it hasn't been received to stock, is that what you're asking, Deborah? I think that's probably what it would mean. So there, it would be hung up and WIP until you produce it. So you would throw an exception there. And I think that's it right now. One more question I know I saw. Is there any thought regarding adding a date parameter to allow closing 30 days after complete? You could control that in the next section I'm going to talk about, I believe. I think, Jay, we're going to talk about the system agent and scheduling our tasks. So let's see if that doesn't kind of answer that. So, okay. All righty. So, as I said, the next thing I want to talk about is scheduling your month-end reports. So, and by reports, that could also, and absolutely will be your processes, like the auto job closing. If you're backflushing labor, you definitely want to set all these things up as scheduling. And most of us, the one thing we almost assuredly have scheduled will be MRP, right? Or if you don't have MRP, PO suggestions. You're going to run that every night, right? But there are some things you can do to help yourself out at month end by saying, okay, on the first day of the month, first thing in the morning, print me my stock status, print me my WIP report, print me my receivables and all of those. So I've got a list here and I say what's missing because I did this in a hurry and I don't use it. So see, you guys are the experts at the day-to-day and using it, and I can come in and throw some maybe new things at you. But certainly if I was using Epicor every month to close out my month end, this would be probably 3 times as long. And for one thing, it serves as a checklist in a sense. Even if I have to go back and reprint my stock status because I didn't get my inventory count done for cycle counts or something like that, I could do so. But it's a nice little way to kind of serve as your checklist. And you're not going to forget it because you're going to come in that morning and all these PDF reports are going to be sitting on your desktop when you open up Epicor. So go ahead and put in chat if you use any of the scheduled reports, just so we can get a feel for how that's working for people. But I want to talk about that though, and I'll show you how you actually do use the system agent. The best way to use the system agent is to email your IT department, right? But you may be smaller and kind of have to do things for yourself. So I'll at least show you some screenshots of how that works. It is definitely set up by user. So if I am the person, so I have to be at my desktop and submit, and I'm going to show that to you on this screenshot. If I am the one who submitted it as a PDF, then it's going to show up on my desktop. It's not going to show up on anybody else's. Or I can say send it to a specific printer. So that's how it's somewhat user-based. So Tim's got some reports he's working out daily and monthly. Eva's got everything to run overnight, and they're getting duplicates. And so, yeah, absolutely, there could be a reason for that. So we'll look at that a little bit because I feel like this is an area that's underused, but can be really helpful. We just need to know a few more of the tools. So I go to, how did I get stock status to show up on my schedule? Or in this case, how did I get my aging receivables to get into my schedule? Well, I simply went to the report as if I was going to print it. And I set up my parameters as I want them to print every month. I want them to be by apply date. I want it to be by due date. But what's really important are these 2 things that I've highlighted. So let's go down to this one first. What schedule do I want it to run in? Now I set the schedule up in my system agent. We'll go there next. And And if it's going to be on a schedule, then I want it to be recurring. So I flag recurring. I look at my drop down, and you may already have schedules that you don't know about. You're so used to seeing this as saying now that you don't even think about it being something that can be useful to you. So you pick the schedule. If there are no schedules, then you set them up and then you say it's recurring. Here's where it can get tricky is, well, my date has got to be dynamic. Because if I just go in and I say, I want this to run every month end, and this month end is May 31st, then every month end it's going to run the May 31st time. So that's why that's a problem. So we're going to use this dynamic filter. So let me pull up a report so we can look at all your choices in dynamic. Again, this is something that's probably underused a bit because we're just so used to our fingers just go and show us that. So hopefully you can see, I brought over to my window the aging receivables. So tell me in chat if you're not seeing my what's live now. And so I'm going to show you dynamic choices. And so I have all these choices. So, you know, some of these don't really work for aging, but they might work for something else. And so the end of the month is where I'm going to land. And so I choose end of the month -1. And that's going to work for me because in my system agent, I have said to run it on the first day of the month, early in the morning. So do you see where if I had said, well, let's run it at the end of the month, the last day of the month, well, for one thing, it wants an actual day, like the 31st. So we all understand why that's a problem. But let me find my system agent on the menu. Not one we go to very often. Okay, so here is the actual system agent is the menu choice. And I've got schedules. So I have set up a schedule called month end right here. And I have said I want the month end schedule to run every first day of the month right here. And the next run will be June 1st at 12 a.m. Now, it's really helpful to think about, well, maybe I want it to be 12 p.m. And I know I always come in and I have a hold on some transactions and I do some cleanup or whatever on the first day of the month. So that helps me. And then my reports get ran at, say, 12 p.m., 2 p.m. And again, what was the dynamic setting? It's not for end of the month. This end of the month, which on June 1st would be June 30th, right? Instead, it'll be a month ago. So that's kind of how you have to really be careful with your dynamic date. And so, Jace, we really need the dynamic date option for the parameter to allow the number of days. Do you mean like every 3 days, every 4 days instead of a day of the week? I think that's maybe what you're saying. So I agree. There's some shortcomings because I've seen in some of these scheduling systems where you can say the last day of the month, right? So that's really helpful. So just some ideas
Unknown
here.
Participant is now exiting.
Okay, so today -2. So yeah, instead of this. And you see that in some BAQ settings and constants. So I'd have to defer to, I don't know if anybody on the line is more of our technical people, but if you really needed it, there might be some DPMs that would help us do it. But you don't have that kind of expert on the line, but that's some good points. There's some limitations. That's kind of why I said in here, okay, this is good in theory, but be careful in practice when you use the dynamic settings, because you do have to really think it through. And you're also going to find that sometimes you have to adjust that schedule. So, and I was going to show you that. one more thing. So what I mean by that is, what if June 1st is on a Sunday? Well, that's not really going to work if I do just as I just said. I use that morning of the first day of the new month for closings. So but I can go in here and I can change the date. I can say my next run, my next run is actually on, well, it's on Monday, but we could change it and say, once this time, I want it to be on 6/2. The preferable thing is you set it up once and you forget about it. But you certainly can come in here and make your adjustments. I cannot make my adjustment like for the whole year. I can only do it for the next run. So a really great little tool, and for checking out, for just like I said, having a good checklist and having a good system. It's not likely you're going to forget to run an aging report. But maybe on the timing, maybe you do forget to save your stock status and do some things like that. So it's nice that they're popped up in your window when you come in on that schedule, and they kind of help you get started on month end. So for that reason enough, I recommend that you set this up. So I say on here what's missing, because it really kind of stuck out to me that I can't run my certain reports until I have captured as well. So that's what was missing. And you can put capture in schedule. I'm kind of the type where I'd rather not. I'd rather control completely the timing of when I capture. If I've gotten on a really good schedule for years, maybe, or, a year or two, then I might start scheduling my capture. Jay sounds like he's got a pretty good routine set down, but there are things that you want to know. Hey, yes, I did that. No, I didn't, before you capture. So again, all of these things are good in theory to use the system agent, to use the dynamic settings, but think it through and adjust as you go, and don't rely on it 100% until you've used it for a while. So that's kind of the scheduling of things. Okay, so I'm going to move a little faster. This checklist will be available, or it's not a checklist, it's an end user procedure. So I've had some of you go ahead and let me know in chat or email me that you would like to have that. I say email because then I have your email right then, but I know that Kevin has everybody's emails as well. So, okay, so back to what did we want to look at? We wanted to look at the job complete and close, system agent scheduling. And now I'm going to throw out some new tools for you that maybe you haven't used with the deferred expense allocations and recurring journals. Okay, so our deferred expense example, I'm going to use advertising expense as my example. But first, let's talk about why should we even use deferred, which again, I've always used the term prepaid expense. Throw in chat if you have other terminology that maybe will help us all. But this would be, we all have a lot of prepaid expenses. We debit our prepaid asset, and then over a certain amount of time, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, a year, we expense it off. And we may use an elaborate system of Excel worksheets. We may actually have physical copies of our invoices, all kinds of ways to try to keep track of this, and it can be a real headache. So there is some pretty straightforward setup in Epicor that I would recommend you use. The setup is minimal. You're going to use then you're able to use that deferred expense maintenance and your AP invoice as your source of record. So that's really great because you don't have to prove it out or go back and pull things when you're doing your journals every month. So it's also contained in Epicor. If you want to add in chat some things that you are already using deferred expenses for, or just things that you have it and you journal it and work it through a different way, perhaps. So the example I'm going to use is the advertising expense that I get a bill for $15,000. And it's due June 1st, but it's actually going to be for advertising that runs over 6 months, right? So advertising a trade show. So how can I handle this the best way? Well, one way would be I enter my AP invoice, I debit prepaid, I have a spreadsheet where I go to every month end and I see to start in June, to end in, let's see, June, July, August, September, to end in November, and I run it that way. And I did that way for years, but we don't have to do it that way. So how am I going to do this in Epicor? I'm going to first set up my, and now they're going to throw a new term at you, the amortization. So it's a deferred expense that uses an amortization rule. And so I'm going to put that together. Now, let's talk about what makes each one of these unique. Because I have at times early on in Epicor thought it through as, well, I can have a 12-month amortization, I can have a 6-month, and that takes care of anything I amortize over 12 months, anything I amortize over 6 months. That's not exactly right, because the third thing that you're going to define is what is your expense code. So you're going to want one for every potential expense that is out there in combination with the duration. So, you know, sometimes we prepay insurance with a 9-month, with a down payment and then expense it out for 9-month payments. There's all kinds of crazy things that happen where your duration could be kind of oddball, you know, 6 months, 12 months, whatever. So we're going to put in our duration, our calculation method. I'm just going to go straight forward and use equal amounts. But check out your this out when you're looking at it. You can also do days of the month. So if instead on this example where it's 15,000 for 6 months, you want to actually say, well, 31 days of a month gets a higher expense, you can do that. We don't need to do that for this. This is just a very straightforward. I get in a invoice from Marketing Specialties for 15,000. I enter it just like I would enter any of them. And it's a miscellaneous invoice. So I put my 15,000 in here, and then this rarely used section, I just flag it and I say, this is a deferred. And then I pick my amortization code from the dropdown. So I might have trade show, I might have insurance, I might have security costs. I see in the examples, certainly software as a service, IT expenses, lots of those sort of things where you're paying more than just 1 month's worth up front. So here you go. You pick the right amortization. This is grayed out, but that's because I've already saved and posted. So I could change that if I needed to and said, actually, this is 6 months, but it's not starting till August, right? Because I'm prepaying for a trade show, right? And that trade show is going to be held in August, and for 6 months, I get something out of that. Maybe that's how you would do that. So hopefully you're all thinking of examples of ways you might use deferred expense. So what's the next step? I'm in my AP invoice still, and I go to my amortization tab. Again, probably a tab you don't go to often and never go to if you're not using deferreds. All of this is populated for me. What's not populated is this box down here. I needed to click create, and I can adjust if I want to. I can say, yeah, usually I can use the amortization code trade show, but this time I want to put more cost up front and lower cost toward the bottom. So I can edit all this. And then no, it's not posted yet. This doesn't post it for me with these post dates, the amortization date. It just gives me a schedule. Okay. So another thing, just to kind of, I'm just throwing in there because I did an AP invoice. The actual 15,000 is going to get debited to prepaid. It doesn't need to get debited over here to the 50 or 6010 account, right? we actually want to record it as an asset, a prepay. So that you do just like you would in any other situation. You go to your GL analysis, and maybe your supplier already had that control, or maybe you had to enter it. All right. So the next step is we need to recognize those. So this is something, put it in your system agent on your schedule, right? So that you don't forget. And so in this case, you see here that I'm running my deferred expense recognition. I can filter and say, I only want to run it for this amortization. More than likely, you're just going to run it for the date, for your month and date. Again, we could have picked dynamic, right? And scheduled it. And then if we would go to our chart tracker, which I didn't do, but we would see that we'd have, once we process this, we have a May 31st offset. Okay, allocations. We just got a couple, two more little quick things to look through, and then we'll be finishing up. So allocations, distribute your expenses across several GL accounts. So what is very common is like your department segments. So the utility bill comes in and you want it to go to 5 different accounts, or let's keep it simple, 3 different accounts, your manufacturing area, your admin, and your sales. And let's say that's based on square footage. Don't get hung up on what is it based on. If you have a basis of just, you said, made up is what it's called, and it's in here, you just say the units are 20, 30, and 50, that's good enough. So don't get too hung up on what your basis is. Just make it work for you. But in this case, I actually knew my square footage for each of my departments, 10 through 50. And so my 40 is my production folks, and they've got 75,000 square feet, and so on. And so I first set this up so that I can use it where, well, when that utility bill comes in. When my utility bill comes in, I enter it just like you would any miscellaneous invoice. And you're going to go to your GL analysis. There's going to be a line here to your default. Delete that line and then say allocation. And you pick your allocation method, which would be called utilities. And there you go. It's going to split this up for you. You go ahead and you post your group. Nothing further to do. So allocation is also available in your general journals. Okay, so AP is a very common practice, though, to use it here. Okay, and the last little tool that's readily available is your recurring journals. These typically update accounts to allow to lag. So this is like your depreciation, your interest, interest revenue, bad debts, those sort of things. So you know that every month of the year, you're going to have this same entry: debit depreciation, credit allowance. And so that's a recurring entry. Also on this, don't get too hung up on, well, my amount changes a little bit every month. At least the recurring journal gives you a template, right? So sometimes I even put in just $1 in each of my debit and credit. So it's a real red flag that now don't use the same dollar amounts every month. Refer to that with whatever document you refer it to. But it's a good way to systematically know everything you need to know for month end. So to set up a recurring entry, you're going to go to recurring journal entry. It's going to look a lot like the journal entry, but it's going to be called recurring, and it's under your setup. And you're going to use a group prefix of recurring, and you're going to set it up here. And then once they're set up, again, at the end of the month, you're going to want to put on your schedule. You're going to create your schedule inside this. So here's recurring journal entry. You're going to go to actions, and you're going to generate your schedule for the year. Then once that's generated, we're going to apply our recurring journals at the end of the month. So this is something we could set up on our schedule under our system agent. And then what that does, so it doesn't actually post it. This group prefix for recurring, we open up our group, we check it out, and we post it from there. So we have complete control over that. So, all right, let's look at the questions real quick, and then I'm going to end with just a brief discussion about credit card tracking, and then we might have time for a question or two. So, Tim is looking to make inventory adjustments every month, stock status, and so that might be an offline discussion. That's huge though, right? When you're having to do those sort of adjustments every month end. So we might be able to take that offline and kind of talk about that more. And so Jody, thanks for giving us that example. The software service, very common. There is a report, I believe. I'm glad you asked that, but I cannot off the top of my head remember what it is. So I'll try to look at that. Did you lose me? Can somebody tell me if you lost me or if I'm there? I just got an error.
I can still see and hear you.
Okay, great.
Yep, you're still there, Sarah.
Working from home, I got a little bit slow on my internet and just gave me an error. So we're good. Okay, so moving right along. I hope this hasn't been too overwhelming. I've thrown a lot at you, but absolutely let us know about EUPs that you want. Give us a little time, but for sure let us know and we'll get those out to you. So I do have something that I consider to be kind of an extra, but as I've worked with different customers, I've seen that we're using credit cards and have been for years, you know, for so many things, and we need better functionality to track that and to reconcile our credit cards. You maybe have a situation where it's just, you know, a large group of salespeople, or it may be that your purchasing is starting to use it because of the, you know, the credit cards really push for that and for the cashback benefits of that. So what I typically do, and I'm just going to bring up a Word document here in a moment, but let's just step through what I do. I set up my Chase Visa, for example, as a bank account. And that bank account is tied to, instead of a asset account for cash, it's set up to the liability for the bank. And then as I get purchases, I actually do them as bank adjustments. And so the only AP invoice I get, let's say I have 100 transactions. Well, I can upload 100 bank adjustments pretty easily in the bank adjustment screen versus putting them in as lines on an AP invoice. And then, of course, my credit card is indeed an AP invoice. I'm going to pay it out of my AP trade. So, and then just to keep things squared away, you enter your payment as an adjustment. So I have an EUP on that, and this is the contents. It's got screenshots and everything. There's also a little complexity that you have to weigh against for those things that you purchase with PO receipts, because you do need to clear those out of your goods received, not invoiced. But that's also addressed in the end user procedure. So, well, according to my clock, we just have a few minutes left. So let's either take yourself off mute and ask me some questions, or if you want to put something in chat, that would be great as well.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
And I do see about a report for that. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Maybe that's referring to allocations or recurring journals or what have you. But it looks like somebody gave us some good documentation on that. Any other questions?
All right. Well, just so everyone knows, I did send the slide deck presentation during this session attached to the meeting request, so everyone should get that, should have received that. And anybody that asked for the EUP, I will get that out as well, Sarah, or I probably will get that out today as well. I think you have our emails there. We would be happy to help out with any questions or any additional assistance that you may have with month-end closing process procedures, any financial related issues. Sarah's great with this stuff, so we would be happy to help out. I absolutely want to thank you, Sarah, for a great presentation. Was awesome. And I want to thank everybody for joining, and keep looking at the emails in our website. We'll be adding additional sessions over the next weeks. So thank you again. I appreciate everybody's attendance.
Thank you, everyone.
How do we go about getting the recording for this meeting, or are we able to get the recording as well?
We are working on that, actually. We've had some technical issues on the website, but we are, and I apologize for that, but we have a session from last week that we're trying to get up there and this week. So I will try to, if you can come back on the website maybe next week, take a look next week and see if it's there, and hopefully we'll have those issues ironed out.
If you want help with it, just to get it up quicker, you could just create a Google Drive link that allows anonymous access temporarily.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, what we're doing is the plan is to convert this from Teams into a YouTube video, and those YouTube videos can get up there pretty quick. So we've got the plan in place, but I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you betcha.